Welcome to a new episode of the Mentor Spotlight series, a live conversation to explore the role of mentorship in developing the professional identity of physicians. I'm your host, Javier de la Maza. I'm a pediatric emergency doctor and the executive director of Ars Medica. And I'm really excited because we have a very special guest today, Brian Volck. Brian is a pediatrician living in Baltimore. He spent several years working as an assistant professor of pediatrics in the Division of Hospital Medicine in Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. He and his wife, Jill, who's also a physician, they worked for 5 years with the Indian Health Service, serving the Navajo and Hopi nations in Arizona. And also his medical interests include global child health and cross-cultural medical communication. And Brian also received his master in fine arts in creative writing. And what's amazing from him, apart from doing all of these different things as a physician, is that he has also published one poetry volume, Flesh Becomes Word, and a memoir titled Attending Others, A Doctor's Education in Bodies and Words. So it's an honor to finally meet you, Brian. I'm really excited and welcome.
Well, Javier, that was a wonderful introduction, and thank you so much. I'm just glad to be here and to see what we talk about.
So why don't we start, by getting to know you a little better, and maybe you can tell us a little more about yourself and what inspired you to pursue a career in medicine.
Though there were some doctors in our extended family, there wasn't a history of participating in healthcare in my immediate family. But from an early age, I thought I was going to be a doctor. I don't know why, but that was a certain fixed idea, and I didn't know exactly what all that entailed. So when I graduated from high school and went to college, I thought I was going to be a chemistry major, and I was going to go directly into medical school after that. And then of course reality happened, and I found that, well, chemistry was fine, but I really liked English literature a lot more, and so I ended up majoring in English literature with enough credits, if I had worked it out, to probably get a biology major as well. But and at the end of those 4 years, I applied for a number of scholarships, thinking that maybe I could prolong this a little bit longer and get a scholarship to do some graduate work in English literature. None of those came through, so I ended up taking my second choice, and I went to medical school, which sounds pretty conceited, but it makes for a good story in any case. And it was a wonderful thing that I went to medical school, because that's where I met my wife. We met under the most romantic of conditions. We had adjacent cadavers, and so we met in just a wonderful situation. But we married at the end of medical school. She went into OBGYN, I went into pediatrics. Along the way, I had a lot of thoughts that I could combine this interest of English literature and writing with physicians, and one of my heroes was Robert Coles, who's still around, but probably not as known as he once was. Pediatric, a child psychiatrist at Harvard, who wrote very widely and made it look easy that one could be a writer and a physician at the same time. Little did I know that medicine and writing are both very jealous lovers, and they don't like to have you spend time with the other too much. So it took a while to figure out how to do that. And pediatrics for me was an easy choice, because I just love children, and I don't have to figure out how to behave around them. I just can be me, and that's why I do it.
Yeah, no, that's a great story, and I mean, I imagine that your passion for literature has found a lot of also inspiration in medicine.
Yes.
Being,
Go ahead. Finish what you were going to say.
no, being a setting where so rich in stories.
Oh, yes. Yes. I mean, one of the amazing things is that what we get all the time are stories. And when we work out a history and physical, the history is itself a story that somebody has told to us, and then we refashion it in a particular way to get the message across to someone else. And if you think about it, the essential thing about a story is conflict. You can have a series of events and you have characters and all that, but if you don't have a conflict, you really don't have a story. You have maybe a narrative or a series of events. And so one of the things that's interesting is that when somebody's coming to you, especially if they're sick, there's already conflict going on. They're sick and they don't want to be, or there's something, they're worried about something and they want to be relieved. So there's already a story coming in, and then we refashion it and we tell other people about it. And William Carlos Williams wrote about this a number of times, talking about how it was so interesting that you could get a sense of what was going on in the community just by the patients who would tell you these wonderful stories. And we have to honor them in a way that is very privileged, that we honor those stories and we tell them very carefully and tell them truthfully. And that's a good thing for a physician to know. There are a lot of physician writers, and I think that they've learned from that practice of taking the history and physical.
Yeah. So, in your opinion, what characteristics make up a good doctor?
A good doctor? Well, first of all, a doctor needs to be smart. He or she needs to know a lot of things, but usually that's taken care of by all the testing and school that you have to go through. So let's take it as a given that the physician we're talking about is the ideal physician. She's already smart. She's already well suited to absorb all this information. But I think she also needs to be very she has to be interested in people because that's what you're doing. You're working with people. She needs to be compassionate, and I think you can learn compassion, but it's hard to think how you teach it other than by example. This is one of those things that you can't write down in a book. So you learn it by observing somebody who's doing it well, doing it already, master to apprentice, which is why medicine still has an apprenticeship. We call it residency, internship, but it's really an apprenticeship. You do things again and again and again so that they become second nature. And pay attention to the physicians who do the work in a way that you find helpful to you, that work in a way that I think is that you find attractive and admirable, and see how they do it. Watch how they do things. I've learned from mentors over my life how to listen better and to take better stories from patients, and so there needs to be this sense of how to get the story, but to understand and be compassionate about it.
Yeah.
So I'll stop there. We could talk more about qualities of a physician, but
no, we will. But I mean, this idea of apprenticeship and how, compassion, empathy are things that we model, that we learn, from looking at others, looking at these role models, of course, and it's about their attitude in front of the patient, their behavior, their language. Yeah, I really appreciate that, and it makes a lot of sense. And I was curious to know what mentors did you have at different stages of your professional journey? If you could share a little bit about that.
I wrote a little bit about this in my memoir. I picked out some mentors that I had in undergrad as an undergraduate. I was thinking of a poet, a biologist, and somebody who helped teach me how to write better. So those were very helpful. In my medical school and residency, I had John Kennel, who was a famous researcher who did a lot of work on infant bonding with, and John was a tall, lanky man, rather on in years by the time I met him, but he was really a wonderful model of compassion for me and a model of attentiveness. Karin Olness, who did a lot of work in international medicine, was a mentor to me. And I'm thinking of James Keating in St. Louis, who was he was a gruff pediatric gastroenterologist who really cared about his patients deeply, and he really cared about words and made sure that you used words very carefully when you presented. You know, we talk about mentors all the time, and it's interesting that people sometimes they make they sort of backform so that the person who's being mentored they call them a mentee, but you forget that mentor actually comes from the Odyssey. Mentor was the person who taught Telemachus, Odysseus's son, and at one point Athena appears to Telemachus as mentor, and so it's important to remember that one of the things that a mentor should be able to give you is wisdom. Athena being the goddess thereof. So a mentor should be able to show you how to do things. Again, there's that sort of master to apprentice, but there's wisdom that he or she gives you, and pay attention to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it sounds from you know, what we could learn from your bio is that you have also spent some time teaching residents. You even receive a Best Clinical Teacher award in Cincinnati Children's Hospital in 2014. And I was also, you know, curious to know how will you describe yourself and your role as a mentor?
I took a relatively hands-off approach because there's so many levels of supervision in medical training now that that I'm afraid that a timid resident may graduate without making a serious independent decision on his or her own, and that's unfortunate. But I would tend to be fairly hands-off when patients or mothers of my patients who wanted somebody to tell them, this is exactly what you need to do. You need to do it exactly this way. They didn't usually come to me because they found out that I would say things like, we can do it this way, we can do it this way, we can do it this way. You know, if somebody was in serious straits, I would say, no, we got to do it this way. So when I worked with the residents on rounds, I would make sure that they knew that these were their patients, that I wanted to hear what they thought, how they came, and I was paying particular attention to how they came to that decision, how they came to their plan. And I would say, these are your patients. I'm going to let you do what you want to do. If you're about to kill somebody, I will stop you. Which they usually giggled at, and I said, "Good, I'm glad you caught the sarcasm there." And there were sometimes they would say things and I would say, that's really not what I would do, but if you want to do that, it's not going to hurt and we're going to learn something. Or they would say, well, what would you do? And then I would cough up what I was really thinking. So I wanted people to get an experience of making decisions on their own. And what I was concerned about mostly was, how did they reason their way to that? What information did they get? And because those are skills that you can I mean, evidence-based medicine is wonderful, but the physician who's applying that, she needs to know exactly when that patient falls out of that pathway, and that they know you no longer can cram the child or the patient of whatever age into that pathway. So evidence-based medicine is very, very important and very helpful, but you have to know when to use it and why, and have to figure out how you come to those decisions of which pathway you're going to go down. And that's so what I would tell the medical students in particular was, watching a presentation was a little like watching a gymnastics at the Olympics. You get on the device and you go through these rotations and flips and turns, and we all expect you to do that. But what we're really waiting for you to do is stick the landing. And the sticking the landing is putting it all together, coming up with an assessment and a plan. And the assessment includes your differential diagnosis to say that, I might be wrong here. And so what else could this be? And I need to be careful about that. So those are the things that I wanted to pay attention to. And I wanted the residents to learn that as much without me, dragging them through the process. So.
Yeah. I mean, also empowering them and giving them the autonomy that you need to. Yeah.
Autonomy within, it's a little like bowling with things in the gutters to keep you from rolling off the sides.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And so pediatrics, it has its very particular challenges. You're both caring for the patient, for the child, but then you also have to establish a relationship with the parents. What are your thoughts about that, and what are some of the lessons that you have learned that you also try to teach your residents or the people who were learning from you or who you were mentoring?
Yeah, there's some people who don't don't want to be pediatricians, which is fine. You should be whatever makes you come alive in medicine. But some people don't want to be pediatricians because they want to get the history from the patient, and you can't do that in much of pediatrics. So you're already working with in a triad of, you're the physician, there's usually the mother, sometimes the father, and then the patient, and you're doing this sort of triadic relationship, and reading the mother again, usually, who's telling you what's going on, and trying to get at the same time assessing the child, how he or she is doing. And paying attention particularly to what I would tell the residents was the story beneath the story. Somebody would be coming in and they would be very upset about something, but it didn't quite fit what was going on with what they were concerned about. And you got a sense, I would get a sense that there's something going on here that they're not telling me, or there's something going on here that's under the surface. And sometimes you have to step back a little bit and say, are there other concerns, or what are you really worried about? Much depends on how the conversation is going, how you get into that. We assume that most parents love and care for their children, and we certainly hope that they do. So, and unfortunately, there are some who don't. But for the most part, we take what parents tell us as true and legitimate as we should. But sometimes there's something going on that you need to be to try to figure out what really is happening here. And I can remember a particular encounter where a mother was very upset about her child who had an ear infection. It was and we finally talked a little bit, and it became clear that what she needed, what was really going on, was that her husband had lost her job, and she was had no money. And I said, well, what would make a difference right now? And she said, you know what I need? I need diapers. And we got diapers for her. I mean, I wrote the prescription for the antibiotics and made sure that it was as inexpensive as possible. But the story below the story was something else other than the presenting the chief complaint. Yeah.
No, that really sounds like something we should remind ourselves more often, and especially because it's so important to be present, in order to, catch and really, so there's some instinct that you develop over time with experience, but then also there's that need to be really present and paying attention to all these other small details.
And it's hard to remember when you're dead tired, that it's a privilege to be there. Believe me, there are times when I don't feel like it's a privilege. There are times I would want to be somewhere else, but it is a privilege to be there, and it's a place that you need to honor. Yeah.
So I'm gonna step out a little bit from the questions that we prepared, but you have developed your writing over the years, and I'm really curious also to know, how writing has influenced you over your career, and what's the role of your writing right now for you as a physician.
Yeah.
If you could share a little bit about that.
I referred a while back to that. I had to learn that even though Robert Coles made it look easy, that you could balance writing and being a physician, or there are other people who do that. Abraham Verghese comes to mind, but it's hard. And I use the analogy, they're kind of like jealous mistresses. They don't want you to be paying attention to the other one. I early on in my career made the error of thinking, well, I'm going to wait till my writing gets better to really start working on things to send out. And in retrospect, that was a really silly thing to say, because the way your writing gets better is by writing. You can't do it any other way. And so learning how to finagle time, to do things in your schedule that open up blocks of time that one can write. I mean, it's certainly easier to write a poem than it is to write a book, just because they're shorter and you can come back. But of course, the other thing about poems is, as Paul Valéry said, a poem's never completed, it's just abandoned. So you keep on revising and revising and revising it. But then all writing is really revision. So I have found different ways of balancing that out over time, but writing is very helpful for me because it as other people have noted, sometimes you don't know what you think until you write it out, and then you see how you're making these connections, and you want it to be true, and you want it to be beautiful at the same time, and sometimes you're lucky enough to have that happen all at once. Yeah. So I write poems because I love what language does. The memoir was really a way of getting at what I learned about medicine after I finished my formal education. The short answer being pretty much everything. And how much I learned from mothers and my patients, the children who are my patients. So, and that you have to have a real affection for them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that idea of learning from the patients, I just love that. It's something that I've also heard before from some of my professors, older physicians, and how they really acknowledge, the respect and how they teach you.
Yes. Oh, yes.
I mean,
yeah. And one thing about kids is they see through things. They know when you're being fake. There's this is a hard example, but there was a study about kids who were in oncology, and what they were talking to children who had terminal diagnoses. And what they found was that the children whose parents didn't want to tell them that they were going to die, the children already knew that. And they played along with mom and dad because they were trying to take care of mom and dad's feelings. So even in that most painful of circumstances, kids see through. They don't take your BS. So
yeah, that's why I love working with kids also.
Yeah.
So to maybe start to finalize the conversation, I wanted to ask you, looking back on yourself as a young doctor, what are some of the things that you know now that you would have wanted to know at the beginning of your career?
Yeah. How much of a privilege it is, how important it is to learn from people who are not like you. I mean, one of the most important, some of the most formative experiences I've had, as a white boy who grew up in the suburbs, was to work on the Navajo Nation or to work in the mountains of Honduras, and to meet people whose life experience was dramatically different from mine, and you learn. So I would have encouraged my younger self to be even more adventurous, to do things that didn't necessarily fit the standard model of making your way to the top of the academic chain. Not that that's bad, but you can do some of that and then come back to the whole academic process. But sometimes you find yourself so drawn into this that you say, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to work here, I shouldn't be telling somebody else's story, but the late great Frank Oski, who was the head of the Children's Hospital here at Johns Hopkins, her daughter Jane came out to work on the reservation when I was there, and she was thinking that she would be there, and then she would probably go on to be a pediatric hematologist like her father, and she's still there. She's still there on the res. And so whenever I go back, I see her, and we talk about Baltimore and how things are going on here. But be adventurous. I would have told myself, and know what a privilege this is. That's what I would have.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful advice for the younger doctors and medical students who are watching us. So I wanted to thank you, Brian, for sharing your stories, your experience, your wisdom. I also want to remind our audience that this event was brought to you by Ars Medica. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to nurturing the personal and professional growth of medical students and physicians. Our online community brings together doctors, residents, and medical students to inspire and support each other in our journey towards a meaningful practice of medicine. If you want to join our community or learn more about our work, you can go to our website. That's www.ars-medica.org, ars-medica.org, and please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Brian. It's been an honor, and we'll continue this conversation some other time.
Okay, I hope so.
Yeah. All right. Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Should I sign off now?